Okay, I can see it. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware of the need to keep your video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting and keep your microphones muted unless invited to speak. Please click on the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical issues or problems, and I would ask for your patience if this occurs. Should it occur, I'll declare a small adjournment whilst the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused while that happens. If it's not possible to address the problem, the meeting may be abandoned or reconvened in a later date. Please also note, to facilitate the discussion, I intend to waiver the committee procedure rules limiting members' contributions to 5 minutes. I also propose to allow members to speak more than once on each item if appropriate. However, please make your contributions concise and to the point. We have got a big agenda today, members. And finally, would I remind members, officers and public speakers that all virtual meetings will be broadcast live and a video recording of the meeting will be published on the Council's website. Okay, so we'll move on to agenda item number 1. We have one apology of absence, Rashenda. Could you just outline that, please?
Yes, apologies from Flavio Vittesi, who represents the Roman Catholic Diocese of East Anglia.
Okay, thank you, noted. Members, I'll call out your name if you could just indicate you're here. So, Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Present.
Councillor Downs.
Present.
Councillor Every.
Present.
Councillor Hay.
Present.
Councillor Hoy.
Present.
Councillor Netzinger.
Present.
Councillor Simon Taylor.
Here.
Councillor Whitehead.
Present.
And Andrew Reid, representing the Church of England Diocese of Ely.
Present.
And myself, Councillor Bywater, as chair. Okay, so we'll move on to declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest?
Chair, sorry, you forgot me.
Oh, Julie, sorry about that. You were on my list. It's my mistake. So thanks for shouting up. I do apologise.
I'm here.
Good to see you. Okay, so let's hope we don't carry on like this. Okay, so any declarations of interest, members, you will be aware you can raise it during the meeting. So if anything does come up, then just raise your hand and we'll note it. Okay, we're being asked on agenda item 2 to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 10th of November 2020 as a correct record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to click on the raised hand function on the right of the screen now? Okay, so I don't see any objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as a correct record, so we'll take those as carried and I'll sign a copy when I get back to Shire Hall. Okay, so we'll move on to the action log. The action log was included in the published papers for this meeting. If any members have any questions on the action log, would they raise the hand function now and on the right of the screen? No members have indicated they want to speak, so we'll take the action log as noted. Okay, so we'll move on to item 3, petitions and public questions. We have one public question which relates to item 6, the winter fund and arrangements to tackle food and fuel poverty. So I'll propose to take that when we reach item number 6. No petitions have been received. Okay, so we'll now move on to agenda item number 4, which is the paper to the Joint Dynamic Purchasing System for Education and Social Care Transport. Hazel Bell Chambers, the Assistant Director for Education, will introduce the report. Is Hazel here?
I think she's been waiting to be let in, Simon.
Okay, so could we let her in then, please?
She should be coming in any second, Chair.
Hi, Hazel.
Hopefully that will work. Sorry about that. I could hear you, but and see you, but I couldn't. Obviously, nobody.
Okay, so relax, Hazel. The agenda item for the Joint Dynamic Purchasing System is all yours now. So if you could take us through it, thank you.
Thank you. I said principally, we need to ensure that new arrangements are in place to enable contracts to be awarded for the provision of education and social care transport to commence no later than the 1st of April 2021 for Cambridgeshire and 1st of September 2021 for Peterborough, as both authorities' current frameworks are due to expire during 2021. We have decided to take this opportunity to build on the shared services model already in place for the strategic management of all policy and operational aspects of education and social care transport delivery. Working in close partnership with specialists in procurement, we have undertaken a comprehensive review of potential available options, and as well as seeking feedback from operators. The conclusion of this work was that a joint dynamic purchasing system using ProContract, which is the e-tendering portal already in place in Cambridgeshire, would be the quickest, simplest and most cost-effective option to implement. Once this is operational and embedded, we will undertake further work to determine the best solution to address the issues we face as a result of the different software systems in place in each authority. The aim being to have a fully integrated specialist transport software system, providing much improved functionality for both authorities going forward. A dynamic purchasing system offers greater flexibility than a framework. Operators can be added throughout the term over which the dynamic purchasing system will run. The term length can also be longer than a framework. And our proposal is that for this joint DPS, we would have a 5-year term. And again, experience shows that in some instances, the longer the term, the better prices we often get from operators. Approval for the strategy has already been secured from the Joint Commissioning Board. Given the cumulative value of the contracts to be awarded, this represents a key decision requiring approval by the committee before we can proceed to implementation. I've received confirmation from legal advisors in Peterborough that at this stage, we do not require approval from Peterborough's Cabinet to proceed. What will be required in due course is a Cabinet member decision notice, but that will be at the point at which Peter will wish to start to use the DPS to tender and award contracts. I'm asking the committee, therefore, to consider and approve the report recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Hazel. Any members got any questions? Lucy?
It's not really a question, it's just a short statement to say that I continue to have quite serious reservations about the extent of the joint working across the two councils, but that I do think that in this case it probably does make sense to have a joint procurement process. So on this occasion I agree that this is the right way forward, but I think that as a general rule I have quite serious reservations about the extent of the connections between the two organisations, because they're actually quite different. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Downs?
Yes, thank you, Hazel. What exactly does the word dynamic mean in this contract?
I think it is just a term to just indicate that it has that greater flexibility than a framework. I don't think it has anything means anything more meaningful than that.
You don't think it's just put in to make it sound good?
I didn't put it in personally. It's actually it is the correct term for the contract.
I see. Not terribly convincing. However, my more serious question is about the mismatch between the time frames. How are you going to? I mean, wouldn't it be more sensible if it was decided at the same time?
Well, in effect, what we're saying is that we will start to run the tender processes starting in the new year once we get approval in place. And yes, under normal circumstances, it would have made sense for them all to start from September. But we do have contracts in Cambridgeshire that we need to have awarded by April. Otherwise, I mean, the potential is that we then just temporarily extend them, but by doing that would cost us more money. So actually, yes, it's not ideal, but it's a pragmatic response to a particular set of circumstances.
And therefore, can you give us assurance that none of the people who use the service will be in any way disadvantaged?
Yes, I can give you that assurance. And what we will be doing between now and the beginning of April is quite a big communications exercise, both with operators, but also with schools and obviously parents. But absolutely, our aim is to make this seamless and as smooth a transition as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. I have no other people indicating they wish to speak, and there appears to be no objections to the recommendations from what I've seen. So can I take that as agreed? If anybody's got any objections, could they raise their hand? Otherwise, I'll take the recommendations on block as carried. I see no hands, so we'll take the recommendation as carried. Thank you very much, Hazel.
Thank you
for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, we'll now move on to item number 5, which is the Regional Adoption Agency. Lou Williams, the Service Director for Children and Safeguarding. Could you introduce the report, please, Lou?
Certainly. This is about the proposal to establish a regional adoption agency between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, with Cambridgeshire hosting the model. This first came to committee a couple of years ago, actually, and the proposal at that point was to look for a voluntary adoption agency to operate regional adoption agency across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire. We did go through a procurement process. There wasn't a suitable applicant, basically, that we could award a contract to. And so we went back to the DfE to ask for permission that we could form a region between Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, which they agreed to, which is really because to my mind, having it just across Peterborough and Cambridgeshire, which is small as far as the DfE is concerned, means that it doesn't lose the link between the two children's services. And I've always had a concern about regional adoption agencies that, for example, cover the whole of the East Midlands, that the connection between the local authorities' children's social work service and the adoption agency becomes a bit too distant. So it's something that we have to do. Government requires us to do it. And actually, as things have turned out, though it's taken a bit longer than we initially anticipated, it's a good result. So the report is asking for you to agree to that recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Members, any questions in relation to the paper? Lucy.
Thank you. I actually have massive reservations about this proposal, because it doesn't really seem to me that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is a region. And the whole point about regional adoption agencies was to try and broaden the reach of adoption agencies in finding correct placements. And I just don't feel that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is actually big enough to fulfill that purpose. I agree. I can see that it keeps the connection within Cambridgeshire and Peterborough with the local services, but it doesn't do what the original idea of the regional adoption agencies was, which was to try and make it easier to find match families across the larger area. And I therefore have huge reservations about why we would be opting for such a small region rather than joining together with Norfolk and Suffolk or with Bedford. There are, I mean, I take the point about some of the regions being very, very large, and that therefore you might lose that connection. But this seems to me excessively small, and that you would lose the whole point of having a region.
So happy to come back on that.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so as both authorities' adoption services actually have very good links with the consortium that used to exist prior to the regional adoption agencies, and so we wouldn't be losing those links. Both authorities have got a long-standing tradition of recruiting adopters, not just for children in need in both Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but for more broadly. And that's one of the guiding principles around this, in terms of my vision for this regional adoption agency, is to continue to do so, because I think we've got two good adoption functions already, and this is about building on the strengths really of those two. It also allows us to have a powerful leader, so this would enable us to have an assistant director level appointment that will be the advocate for regional adoption and for adoption agencies. And part of the big issue for adoption agencies actually is to improve the profile of adoption with local partners, and particularly in respect of courts, guardians ad litem, and so on. So I think we can tick all of those boxes very well. And as I say, I think I accept your point in terms of, you know, that Peterborough and Cambridgeshire being a small region. It is quite a small region. It does fit the DfE's criteria just in terms of numbers of children historically coming up for adoption. But we would be making very sure that we remain part of the broader informal, if you like, networks of adoption agencies as well.
Can I just come back on that? It sounds so what is the reason for not joining the consortium rather than setting up on our own? And is that is the main driver financial?
So the main driver is not financial. The main driver for me is that I don't want us to form part of a formal arrangement with it, because I don't want to lose control, if you like, or lose touch with the adoption services. I want them to remain integral to what both authorities are doing. I think that's actually really important too. As things progress, you know, it is possible that we might make some more formalised arrangements or formalised relationships with other consortiums. But for now, this is the right decision for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, as far as I'm concerned, and I really do believe that very strongly.
Okay, thanks, Lou. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this very much. I mean, I'm very glad to see that the adoption is we're coming home and back to inside the county council, where it was, I think, when I first joined the council. And I welcome this very much, because I did feel that with the outsourcing move that we did begin, I think, to lose some of the impetus there. And I personally am delighted to see that it's coming back in-house again.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Councillor Downs.
Thank you. I'm not terribly interested in the structures and the status and all that sort of thing. What I'm interested in is the confirmation from Lou that this improves the experience of the children. That is the criterion for me. Now, we've had a lot of difficulty, I think, in finding adoption places, and the schemes are schemes, but it's the quality of the experience and the appropriateness of the adoption that matters most. And what if are you really telling us that this will make life better for the children who are going to be adopted?
So my view is that yes, it will. Not just in terms of the other function that Regional Adoption Agency or the adoption agency we will have is to provide support for children and adults who are affected by adoption. So post-adoption support, as well as birth parent counselling, as well as support to adoptive families, and all of that actually will become part of the responsibility of the two authorities. And in that sense, actually being able to have a service that is it's within the same boundaries as the rest of our partnership. So health operates across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. This service will operate across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, should mean that we're better able to provide a good arrangement of support for children who have been adopted and for adoptive families, as well as increasing the profile, as I say, for adoption locally. So I genuinely do think this will be a good result for children and young people in Cambridgeshire. But
will we still need to find adopters outside that region?
Inevitably, and that's because there are some. I mean, for example, there are going to be, usually very small numbers, but for some children, it becomes essential to move them out of the local area for their own health and well-being, basically, where relationships with birth families have become very fractured, and it's a very difficult, poisonous relationship. Inevitably, we will need to source some adopters from outside, but equally what I'm really clear about is that we also have a manageable surplus of adopters ourselves, so that we can provide adoptive families to children in need elsewhere. And that's part of a long tradition in terms of adoption services, and we'd carry on doing that.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I don't have any other members wanting to speak. Can't see any more hands raised. So given that there's been a little bit of disagreement on this, I think we'll go to a formal vote, okay, in relation to the recommendations that are highlighted in the report. So if I call your name out, if you could just say for or against or abstain, please. So Councillor Ambrose Smith.
For.
Councillor Downs,
Abstain.
Councillor Every,
For.
Councillor Hay,
For.
Councillor Hoy,
For.
Councillor Netsinger,
Abstain.
Councillor Simon Taylor,
For.
Councillor Whitehead,
For.
Councillor Wisson,
For.
and myself, Councillor Bywater, 4. Sadly, the co-opted members are not eligible to vote on this one, so I do apologise. But Rashenda, I take that that's a majority there.
Yes, that's confirmed, Chair. It's a majority.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Lou. We'll now move on to agenda item 6. Okay, the Winter Fund and arrangements to tackle food poverty. Wendy Ogle-Wellborn, the Executive Director for People and Communities, will introduce the report along with Jonathan Lewis, Service Director for Education, and Adrian Chapman, Service Director for Communities and Safety. We will then hear from our public speaker, Councillor Smith. The situation on this subject is evolving quickly, so I've asked officers to give a presentation to brief the committee on the developments since the report published papers last week. We will hear from Councillor Anna Smith of Cambridge County Council after the officers have presented their report. So Wendy, if you take the lead, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. The Winter Grant Scheme is to run from December to March 21, and for Cambridgeshire, there's £1.4 million. The funding is to support food, utility and other essential costs for vulnerable families and individuals as an alternative approach to one focused solely on recipients of free school meals. It is welcome that central government funding to support the most vulnerable has come to local authorities, as we are most likely to have the local knowledge and infrastructure to ensure that support is targeted where it is most needed. Local discretion means that we can ensure that families and others facing particular challenges can access support even if they are not in receipt of free school meals, which is a very welcome flexibility. And John and Adrian are now going to describe the proposed approach that we would like to take. So over to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm just going to pull up the presentation that hopefully members have received in advance. Just get it up on screen. Apologies, it's getting there. Hopefully you can all see that okay. Just let my computer catch up, apologies. So I think Wendy's led us in there. I'll just get this onto full screen. In theory. Apologies, I've got a lot of things open. It's probably taken a while because of my screen. There we go. Okay, so as I said, Wendy's probably given some of the introduction here to the report. Just to say and to reiterate, we received updated guidance on the 24th of November. And throughout the time, we've been working through both the draft and the final guidance. It's a slightly unusual grant because local authorities have full discretion over how it's spent. There are some rules which we'll share with you going forward, but we've wanted to make sure this is right, and we wanted to make sure that we targeted the appropriate families and not necessarily be caught by conventional definitions that we felt were better suited to the Cambridgeshire area. So that's why the report is late, and obviously what we're presenting today is the very latest position, and obviously this may still change slightly, but likely the final view and where we're up to. So Wendy's covered that already, the amount of money we've got. Just so you're aware, the allocation was based upon our deprivation and population statistics. I think it was a DACI they used, which is what we use in the schools funding settlement. So clearly targeted at deprivation. As always, we are concerned around the data. It doesn't necessarily show all the position, hence why we wanted to use the flexibility and not be caught with those firm definitions going forward. This is the national guidance. It shows how we have to focus on certain households. There are some rules around a certain amount of money being targeted at children and young people and their families. There is some headroom to fund other pressures that are locally, but overall, a fairly targeted scheme, but again, with our discretion how we meet it. We have to report back on this grant about where the money's been spent and the different areas. We're looking to use the wide definition, and you can see things there like purchasing white goods to support families. We're looking at models, and Adrian's certainly going to come and explain more of the detail around how we support the wider communities outside of the part I'm going to focus on around children in education. So the first part, and we're estimating a spend of around 862,000 on these areas. Is the establishment of a food voucher scheme, where essentially every eligible child who meets the definition will receive a £15 supermarket voucher for each of the 2 weeks of Christmas and the 1 week in February. We have to spend the grant by the end of March, so we've had to model how many pupils and families we think may need that support. And that's obviously then informed our eligibility criteria. And we've decided to, in this category, to focus on 4 groups. Those children eligible to the pupil premium, those that are funded 2-year-olds, both of those means tested, very similar definition to free school meals, which is the next category. And we've also decided, because of the relative challenges in this group, we will look at funding the 16 to 19 bursary eligible students for those vouchers as well. We are going to be allocating this money prior to Christmas. We're aiming to get everything out by the last day of term, which is the 18th of December. We are going to use the information we hold in existing data systems and approaches, so there will not be an application process for these parents to access this information. I'll come on to the system we're using on the next slide, but essentially it will automatically be allocated to those families using information held in local systems. We are offering the option for families to opt out if they don't wish to take up the offer. There'll be an opt-out process, a simple email into our central hub team, and that will be enacted. We will be putting a time limit on the vouchers, so if they're not spent by the end of January, we will recycle that funding into a different part of the scheme. Obviously, we will talk to parents, remind them, send out, certainly in January, a note to remind them that they're available. We think that will be an effective way of making sure those that need it support know they can use it still after that period. In terms of the system, we have been through a market test to look at how we're doing it. We're just working on the procurement side of this at the current time, and the recommendations at the end reflect that. The system we've decided to follow is a system called Wonde, and it is a system we used in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough at the start of the COVID pandemic, up until the government brought in the Eden Red system. The majority of our schools were using Wonde. It is a very intuitive system. We can easily go in and access information. We can allocate vouchers to individual pupils through that system, and parents will receive a text or an email with the voucher on. They're able to select one of 8 supermarkets, and if parents cannot access or need support from schools, the system enables the schools to go in themselves, access that voucher and pass it on to the families. Obviously, communication is going to be key. We're doing a huge amount of work on that going forwards. The data set is already in place. Of the 330 schools, there's about 40 that don't use it today. So we're working through getting them all set up and ready to do this going forward. I think we're very pleased with the interaction we've had with Wonde, and we think this is a viable tool to get us those vouchers to those families in plenty of time for the Christmas break. Okay, I'll hand over to Adrian now that will cover the wider aspects of the support scheme.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, members. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me along. So just to add a bit more detail around the additionality that we want to achieve through the scheme. John's described the support available, a universal offer to all of those families with children in receipt of free school meals and so on. But as he mentioned, the scheme is also available to support families and individuals with other needs, other immediate needs beyond just the urgent food requirement. And that can include other essential supplies. It can include help with household energy and water bills, white goods, as John mentioned, and even practical things like fixing the boiler, just to keep the family and the individual who might be struggling in a number of different ways, warm, safe and well over the winter months. And we want to really exploit every opportunity we have available to us to ensure that this scheme reaches as many people in Cambridgeshire as it possibly can with that kind of support. We're fortunate in that members and others have supported so well the county-wide hub since the start of the pandemic about 9 months ago now, and we believe that's the right vehicle to use to coordinate this kind of support and activity. We've got the infrastructure in place, we've got the staff in place, and we've been well used to speaking to a wide range of people with lots of vulnerabilities over the last 8 or 9 months. So we want to creating a single front door, as it's called, a single place where people can reach support either by telephone or via an online I need help form. But that is not to replace anybody being able to also go to their local parish council, their local voluntary organisation, their local church, wherever else they might get support, district councils and so on. It's just another option that people will have. And the additional support that I've described is available to those that are already in receipt of the vouchers that John's discussed, but also we want to broaden out the eligibility to the group there that you can see bulleted on the slide. So households in receipt of some benefits, those facing financial hardship, including those families that are considered to be just about managing. We know of a lot of families that have been adversely affected by the pandemic and are likely to continue to be adversely affected, and we want to make sure that they're identified and we can reach out with some support if that's needed. You can see the other groups that we're specifically targeting this support for. And requests for help will be verified by the county-wide hub in a very, very simplistic way. This is not a lengthy bureaucratic application process. It's a very simple, rapid response to an urgent need, and that's very much the style that we've developed as part of the model. Thanks, John. So alongside the voucher system, alongside the practical support I've described, we also want to build on our existing infrastructure across Cambridgeshire and provide funding to a number of different groups and organisations that are already delivering work in this space. You can see at the top there, we've got around about £600,000 left. If everybody that receives the automatic voucher downloads and uses that voucher, we're left with about £600,000 to be spent by the end of March. And there are a wide range of organisations that are already providing a lot of practical help and support. There'll be trusted organisations, there'll be organisations that vulnerable people and those that are struggling will probably be more familiar with than perhaps approaching the local authority. They'll perhaps feel more comfortable with going along to, say, their local Citizens Advice Bureau or accessing a district council or a church. And we want to ensure that those parts of our system are funded with some of that remaining grant. So particularly draw your attention to Citizens Advice Bureaus and the Cambridgeshire Local Assistance Scheme as two really good examples that are already providing practical help such as energy vouchers, white goods, clothing and so on. And we do not want to create a new set of systems here, but use instead those trusted relationships we've got with those organisations and support their work even further. And we're also proposing to retain a very small allocation of funding centrally, but the district and city council colleagues and other organisations can access to make direct small grant payments to individuals and families, where actually what's needed is just an immediate form of practical help. So, you know, up to sort of the value of £50 probably, but just something that immediately a family or an individual just needs to get them over a particular pressure point in their lives in that moment. And then we'll also be allocating an amount of funding from the balance to each district and city council who have been exemplary partners throughout the pandemic to date, operating as part of a hub network. And that will be designed to help them fulfil their responsibilities as part of our systemic approach to exploiting positively all that's good about this scheme. Thanks, John.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So just to be clear on what happens next, as already mentioned, we're drafting letters to go out to parents and to the press to make sure people are aware. We're obviously keen to publicise it and make sure everyone takes this up. We provisionally briefed head teachers doing that again on the 4th of December going forwards. And obviously, hopefully through your networks and through the work Adrian's doing, make sure that everyone is very clear on what the offer is. Signpost, particularly the elements that Adrian has covered around, wider community support, but make sure that everyone is in receipt of the support they need for particularly the Christmas holidays. Obviously, we will reflect. We will obviously, learn from what happened at Christmas with a view to considering again the February half term and what goes on there. But equally, it's important that we know we have the reach. And one of the positive side of this is that we will hopefully see more families engaging with us, and that means that the ongoing support can stand simply beyond just the end of February half term and continue on until we know families are in a much more secure place. As the COVID pandemic hopefully recesses into the summer period. So that's kind of where we are next. So in terms of the recommendations in the paper, we obviously originally had a paper that just had a note around the proposal. What we'd like to do is bring forward some officer recommendations around this to agree the process that we've just outlined for allocating the winter grant. I mentioned the challenges that we still had to go through with procurement. So there is a process the Section 151 officer and the chief exec would need to go through to make sure that we can use this system to allocate out free school meals. And obviously we want your endorsement to give Wendy the authority to make sure we deliver this very important government scheme. So those recommendations are added and in addition to the one that's already stated within the report that you've had. So that's where we are. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan, Adrian and Wendy. We'll now hear from Councillor Anna Smith of Cambridge City Council, who has requested to speak on this item. A copy of Councillor Smith's comments was published on the Council's website on the 26th of November and circulated to all members of the Committee for information. Nice to see you, Councillor Smith. You have up to 3 minutes to address the committee. If you're speaking after the 3 minutes, the Democratic Service Officer will ask you to draw your comments to a close. The committee members will have the opportunity to ask you any specific questions and then they'll go on and debate and vote on the recommendations that we've all heard. Okay, so over to you, Councillor Anna Smith.
Thank you, and I've got a timer set, so hopefully shouldn't go over the 3 minutes. Can you hear me?
Fantastic, carry on.
Okay, and so said my name is Anna Smith. I'm Executive Councillor for Communities at Cambridge City Council. And I want to thank you for the chance to address you today and also to thank the officers for bringing us some really clear reports and thank you for the work that they're doing. So for many years now, the council and our partners in Cambridge City have been really aware of the problems that are caused by holiday hunger. It's why we've been working together to provide a holiday lunch programme for several years, normally in our community centres, because we live in one of the most unequal cities in the country, and it's clear that COVID-19 has only made it worse. So in our city, over the pandemic, there have been 11,000 hours of volunteer support that have allowed for 17,000 visits to our food hubs, 113 tonnes of food distributed and 10,000 cooked meals prepped and delivered. So we were really devastated on behalf of our families back in October to hear the government were not prepared at that time to provide free school meals over October half term. And the city community did what it could to address that need, and businesses and voluntary groups worked with us to support 199 additional households at that time, and I want to thank them. But clearly we can't do it alone. And that's why I was really relieved to hear this turnaround, that there will be the ability to offer a greater free school meals offering in the Christmas holidays. And I hope, and it was alluded to in the officer report, so I hope that this is something that can be offered, that this is the start of providing holiday meals regularly, because poverty isn't going to get dispelled with the vaccine. It's going to be with us. So I hope that there will be also an agreement for providing this moving forward. But in the short term, and given the problems that the free school meals holiday voucher system has caused in the past, I've really come to ask for reassurance that everything possible will be done to ensure and to monitor the maximum take-up and successful implementation of food voucher systems. I'm a former school leader myself, so I know how much work it can take to encourage people to access the support that they so badly need. So I would like to ask my question, which is, what will the County Council be doing to help ensure the success of the food voucher scheme? And please include how you will carry out the monitoring of take-up in this answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Smith. But I'm just going to respond to that. So in these unprecedented times, the committee welcomes the funding provided by central government to support vulnerable families and individuals this winter. We also welcome the additional flexibility within the scheme and the fact that it allows us to broaden the scope of those who we can assist, and that the scheme is to be operated on a local basis by those with the necessary expertise and local knowledge. The report in front of the committee and the report that we've heard sets out the approach proposed by the council. We will ensure that we target all those in receipt of free school meals, and schools will be able to assist in this area. We are offering a broader and more flexible support package, enabling us to provide support to, for example, families who are in significant need, who are just above the threshold for free school meals. Support will also extend in some circumstances to assistance with household utility bills. We will be encouraging schools to refer families who need support. Our approach is to utilise our cross-cutting Think Communities approach and coordinate support through the county and district hubs. This will also provide us with the opportunity to have a broader discussion about other forms of support that would be of use to vulnerable families and individuals, including, for example, individual support from the Citizens Advice Bureau. Monitoring of how the funds are used is required by central government, and we will be monitoring the take-up to ensure that those eligible for and in need of support take advantage of the offer. We will also highlight to schools where vouchers haven't been used. Okay, so that's my response to your question, really, and it's points that you've made well. I just want to just open it up to members now. If you've got any questions for Councillor Smith, Councillor Netzinger. You're on mute.
My question isn't really for Councillor, well, I can ask Councillor Smith a question, but actually I put my hand up for a more general point of view. I'm very glad that Councillor Smith is here to make the points that she's made, and I'm also, I would like to thank her for the work that Cambridge City Council and other district councils did over half term to try and make sure that children did get enough to eat. But actually my hand was up for a more general point.
Okay, so I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you, Lucy. Thank you. Any other specific questions? I can't see any hands raised. And Councillor Smith, thank you very much for coming today to address the committee. And yes, I do want to thank you for the efforts that the Cambridge City Council have done on behalf of all the young people within Cambridge. So thank you. Okay, members, we'll now go on to ask questions and debate the paper that we've heard. So Lucy, back to you, please.
Thank you. So partly I want to echo what Councillor Smith has said and say how very glad I am that we are now in the position of discussing how we're going to be distributing money for children with free school meals. There were a number of us who were appalled that this was not supported before half term, and that there had to be a major campaign against the government and to get them to change their mind on this. And I think we all need to thank Marcus Rashford for the amazing campaign that he ran to make sure that this was turned around and that we did have children properly fed over the Christmas holiday. I think it's also important to say that I am very relieved by the papers that are in front of us today. I have been quite worried since the government's announcement that there would be more barriers put in place so that it would be difficult for children to access this money. But actually the papers that have come forward seem to be showing that actually it will be very straightforward for families to get hold of the support that they need. And I hope very much that that's the case. I'm particularly pleased to see that the vouchers for children who are on free school meals will be distributed without anybody needing to ask for them. They will simply go straight to those families in as many cases as it's possible to do that. So I would like to thank Jonathan and the other officers for the work that they've done in making sure that that process can be as smooth as possible, so that the money simply goes straight, the vouchers simply go straight to families who need them, and there's no need for extra form filling. It is absolutely true, as Adrian was saying, that there are many families who are not on free school meals who are going to be struggling this winter. And it is very good that there will be some extra capacity. I wasn't sure how much extra capacity there would be. It's still not clear whether there will be enough, but it is very good that that is there. I think we all need to be aware that the constraints on who is allowed to get free school meals and who is entitled to means tested benefits are incredibly tight these days, and that there will be very large numbers of families, not just this Christmas but also going into the new year and the spring, for whom getting access to help is going to be extremely difficult. Families who are unaccustomed to having to deal with the benefit system, who have felt in relatively secure circumstances and suddenly find that they are not in any way secure, and that safety net that they had assumed was there is not there. So it is helpful that this is a little bit of a safety net for some of those families, and I hope very much that they will be able to get the support when they need it. So thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Councillor Every.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to add to Lucy's thanks to Jonathan and to Adrian for what they've done so far and for what we know they're going to be doing over the next 2 or so weeks, and also pass the thanks on to our schools as well, who are going to be involved in yet another initiative to deal with this. But I want to speak particularly here about a group that doesn't quite seem to fit into the way of providing these vouchers, etc., and that's the care leavers. So I wanted to ask a couple of questions about this, because they don't necessarily fall into those easy categories that if you're at school or you're on a database for that. So I'm assuming that for care leavers that goes up to a certain age. Perhaps you could just clarify that. But also, because I think within districts there is less knowledge of the care leavers they may have there, unless they're involved in housing, how actually we are going to get this information to our care leavers. And I pick up Councillor Smith's point of how difficult it is to persuade people to take up these things. And I think for the care leavers, this is going to be particularly challenging. And I would just like to see understand how this is going to work, because these youngsters definitely need this kind of support, and they don't have families around them to do that. So I'm really keen to hear what I think it might be Adrian who's going to answer. I don't know who's going to answer that, but the age that it goes up to for care leavers, and how can we absolutely ensure that every care leaver who needs this is going to get it.
So I'll ask Lou to come in, because Lou's got his hand raised. He'll be able to be more specific. Lou, over to you, please.
Hi. So in terms of care leavers, so there is provision within these proposals around social workers being able to identify vulnerable people, and that would include care leavers. And of course, we do know, and every care leaver has a personal advisor. So, you know, the core responsibilities for care leavers, as you know, goes up to 25. It's a slightly tiered approach beyond 21 to 25, and it's more of a voluntary arrangement in the sense that care leavers can always actually say they don't want our services, but they're more able to do so after the age of 21. But those that we're in touch with, which is the majority, we will be working very closely with and making sure that they get the support that they need, either through this scheme or through corporate parenting support that we would provide as well.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Everett. Thanks, Lou.
Thank you.
Councillor Whiston, please.
Thank you. Yeah, a very interesting and comprehensive presentation. Thank you. I've just got a question on one of the slides, accessing support. So at the bottom of the list of people that are eligible is people with no recourse to public fund status. Could you just explain to me what that means? Sorry.
Adrian, you want to come in?
Thank you. I was being polite and putting my blue hand up, but so thank you, yeah, for the question. Absolutely. So people with no recourse to public funds are those who haven't exercised their treaty rights. So tend to be foreign nationals here in the UK who are not eligible for public funded support, essentially. So probably a good example that I'd use are adults that have in parts of our county found themselves sleeping rough and who have been accommodated in hotels as part of the government scheme to support people off the streets, but that scheme will end. And what we don't want is there to be a cliff edge for those people, regardless of their status, and therefore this support will be available to them as well. The numbers are not significantly huge, that we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of people here, but we do think there is a gap there. And the beauty of this scheme is it allows us to work with all of our partners, district councils, government departments and others to really wrap additional support around those people using this scheme as the initial point of engagement. So I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Adrian.
great, thank you.
We've got Councillor Simon Taylor, then Councillor Whitehead, followed by Councillor Hoy. So Councillor Simon Taylor, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got three questions, probably more for Adrian. You did mention with the countrywide hub and its networking, you said that there's people in place. What I'm thinking is obviously, oh, I should have put the bird out. Sorry, I've got a bird in the background. What I'm thinking is a lot of the council staff were deployed from their roles. I'm guessing a lot of them have gone back to their original roles now. Are you happy that you've got enough people in place to deliver this? That's my first question. Should I do it all together or one at a time? All together. All right. And the other one is when they're talking about the small grants for community groups. How do these community groups access them? How are we going to make them aware of this? It'd be good for us as councillors to know how we can put this forward to our groups of how they may be able to access these grants. And also, will there be a link that we as councillors can then push forward to our community groups to say, about this funding and how we can help our residents? Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Thank you, Chair, if I may. So I'll pick them off in order. First of all, the county-wide hub absolutely did benefit from huge numbers of redeployed staff during the first wave of the pandemic. But members will be aware that we've never stood that hub down. We've continued to operate right the way through the whole period, and indeed it remains fully active today, providing practical help and support to a whole range of different people, and also helping with the effort to combat the virus, so helping with mass vaccination work and testing and all sorts of other important pieces of work. We benefit from having a core team here and also still a number of redeployees. And council colleagues across the whole of our organisation have committed to supporting redeployments until we beat the virus, so for as long as it takes. I'm therefore really confident that we've got what we need. I think we've also got to hand a list of hundreds of volunteers out there in our communities who have been on standby and have stood up at various times and then had to stand down again when there wasn't the demand, who I know will step in and come alongside us to support this really important work. So I'm very confident that we've got the capacity here. And the small grants point you make is really important, and we've so far encouraged those organisations that we've engaged with to discuss a role that they might play with their local district or city council, so that we can create local solutions that are more aligned to the needs of a local area. And we think that the local district or city council, along with our knowledge about a place and the knowledge of our councillors, coming together will give us the best mix of solutions. So we've encouraged lots of community organisations to engage with their district council. And we're doing that through an amazing network that has existed since the start of the pandemic. We call it the Community Resilience Group. There are about 38 now members on that group from the voluntary, community and faith sectors and public sector partners that have come together once a fortnight and faithfully during the whole of the pandemic. They give up their time, and it's an amazing energy and enthusiasm to form a really tight network to deliver schemes such as this. And so some of the big organisations around that table, Age UK, the CABs, and so on, Alzheimer's Society, but so too are a number of smaller organisations and representatives of smaller organisations, including the Councils for Voluntary Service. So we'll be using the CDSs to make sure small voluntary groups are aware of the opportunity here. But if you come across any groups that you think could support this work, please do direct them to either the hub or to the local district council. And then to your final point, very briefly, absolutely, there will be a link. There will be plenty of social media activity that we'd like you to promote, if you would, for us, including the link to the online form, which is a very simple form. It won't suit everybody. There is also a phone number, and people can email us. So there's a range of options, but that form is the fastest way to get to the right bit of support, and we'll definitely be sharing that with members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian and Simon. Councillor Whitehead, please.
Well, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask you, I know we're the Children and Young People's Committee, but I just wondered whether there was money. I don't know whether people saw News at 10 on BBC last night, but an absolutely heartbreaking report about poverty in Burnley. And not just children and families, but there were a lot of elderly people living alone who are isolating because of COVID-19, who are very much in distress and obviously are a group that can suffer very much from poverty. They don't have champions. I mean, obviously the work of people about children is clearly essential because they are very vulnerable members of our society. But is there any money going to the Adults Committee to actually help vulnerable adults in dire poverty, as some of them are? Are we able to help them as well as the groups that are the children that we're families that we're helping?
Shall I come back in again on that one?
Yeah, if you can answer the question, Adrian, then please do.
No problem at all. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I agree. There are lots of people at risk out there right now, and this particular funding doesn't provide any capacity for the Adults Committee, but just remind members that up to 20% of the budget can be used for people with no children in the household. That can include individuals or couples, including older adults. Whilst we've highlighted for you today some priority groups that we want to target, there is absolutely no reason whatsoever why we wouldn't also make this funding available to older adults who find themselves in that situation. But I would just draw your attention also to work that the Communities and Partnerships Committee are leading at the moment. We've developed this scheme very closely with the chair of that committee, Councillor Steve Criswell, because that committee is leading some work to tackle poverty head on, and we have a cross-party task and finish group that has stood up again actually in recent weeks. It was paused at the start of the pandemic, but actually the work is becoming more and more vital, and there are a range of initiatives that will be coming forwards to support people that aren't necessarily directly impacted or can be supported by schemes such as this one. So we'll make sure, and obviously through committee, those papers will be widely publicised, that we make sure there's some cover there for our older residents as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Hoy, please.
Yeah, so the first point I just wanted to make was that I really welcome the bit about the money for people that are kind of struggling, that aren't perhaps in your traditional categories, because obviously we all know benefits have increased, but a number of people that are working and recently lost their jobs, and quite a number of residents I've been speaking to are quite concerned about obviously Christmas and finances. So I think that's a really positive addition, so thanks for that. And just a very quick point on the community groups. One thing I absolutely loved about COVID was that it reduced bureaucracy massively, and I think that we all got a load of good lessons from that. So I find myself at a bit of odds kind of asking for a bit of bureaucracy, which is a weird situation to find myself in. But it's just in relation to the community groups, I just would ask that we do some sort of basic level of checking, because I am aware that there are quite a few groups that have sort of started to spring up that are perhaps not always have as good intentions as they seem. I think we do need to do some sort of checks on them at least. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hoy.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, sorry, Chair. Thank you. I absolutely agree with you. And you know, at the end of the day, this remains public funding. So whilst we want the process to be seamless, we want the process to be rapid. We also need to make sure there's appropriate governance in place. And we've used the word, I think, in the slides, that trusted voluntary organisations are the ones that we need to be working with. Anybody that, any organisation that benefits from funding through this scheme will need to provide the most basic of evidence. There will be, you know, the money is not significant, it won't go a huge distance, so it's important we work with a small number of very trusted partners, and I can assure members that that due diligence will take place prior to any awards being made.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Downs, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to pick up and develop a little bit one or two of the points made by colleagues already. Obviously, the scheme is welcome, as obviously it's necessary and so on. I want to be sure that we as councillors are very well briefed as to exactly how this is to be implemented, because people will expect us to know the answers. Now, I'm in contact with about 5 or 6 different parishes and areas, and they're all doing things differently. They're all doing things. They've been helping over the last few months, but all in different ways. Some have got community hubs, some is done through the parish council, some is done through the local church. Some have set up hamper groups, some have got, you know, food going in community centres. It's actually a very diverse pattern, even within a small area like Brampton and Huntingdon. And they're all doing good work, and they all benefit from this support. So I wonder if you can spell out for us, Adrian, particularly, I think I'm looking at you, exactly how a local councillor can direct these groups to the kind of assistance that they might be able to make use of.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Downs. Again, music to my ears. I think members know very well my passion for local place-based working, and we've got 220 or so parish and town councils, every one of which is individual, and every one of which knows far better than I or my colleagues do about the residents and community within which they operate. And our route to those parish and town councils has to be our local elected members, our county councillors. So vitally important that you remain fully briefed. Hopefully today is the start of what will be a series of notes and updates that come through you. It is, as Jonathan said, an ever-evolving programme, but we do need to get it up and running very quickly. So we'll keep you very, very close to that. And what we want to make work is that whoever is making a referral for any individual or for any community organisation across the county, whoever they are, whether it's an elected member, a parish councillor or a resident, that the way to get that help is through exactly the same means. So the online form or the 0345 number can be used by any member, any parish councillor, any resident, and you'll get exactly the right support in the most timely manner by following that approach. And playing back to Councillor Taylor's point, it's important we share those details with you. Once we've got, assuming we get some agreement today, once we've got that agreement, we can mobilise those contact details. And I just urge you to use those and to spread the word as widely as you possibly can. There are other forms of support available. So, you know, this is specifically about the Winter Support Grant, but we've linked this up to a whole range of other activities and interventions, much of which is separately funded through the COVID grant schemes that have been available from government. So it gives us a chance, if we channel everything through one system, to make sure that connectivity is made, and we can make sure that groups benefit as widely as possible.
Thank you. Just a very quick follow-up. The sooner the better, Adrian, really, because, you know, we're into December now, and the last cycle of parish council meetings, for example, is taking place in the next two weeks. My follow-up question is, what happens when the money runs out? Have we got any contingency planning from County Council's own budget, or are we just going to say, sorry, mate, that's it?
So as yet unconfirmed. Sorry, Jonathan, I think you were signalling. Do you want to pick this one up?
Yeah, just to say, Peter, we've shared with you one of the government schemes that have come through. There is another government scheme that was announced only last week around, particularly around holiday clubs, but providing meals for vulnerable pupils. There's an expression of interest out for that scheme to be a layer of continuity of this approach. It won't be certainly a universal voucher scheme, but it will be a targeted support to those that need help over the holidays. And I think we're proposing to put an application in for that process. And I suggest we bring a report back to you in January about what that means and how it may build upon this work and certainly move it forward. Obviously, if there was a conversation around further funding, we'd be really keen to extend this, but at the moment there's no commitment from government, but anything else and apart from that.
Thank you. There's nobody else indicated to speak, so I'm just going to quickly sum up and just say thank you, really. I know the officers have been working extremely hard when this was announced. This funding was announced a few weeks ago. I've witnessed the amount of hard work that's gone into this, not only from Adrian, John and Wendy, but also people within the organisation and our recognised organisations, our district colleagues. Everybody has, I use this word, co-produced, and co-working has been fantastic, and it's got to continue. I recognise what Councillor Downs said in relation to what happens in the future. I guess we've got to keep that at the back of our mind, but also work on what we've got here in front of us at the moment. I welcome the fact that there's a proposal to bring a paper back, because it'd be good to see this as members, how we progress and how well we do. Maybe January's a bit early. Maybe we bring it to the March meeting, but we'll work that out, I'm sure, as we go forward. So members, I haven't seen or heard any negative comments in relation to this. I personally welcome it. I look forward to it happening and rolling out. Unless anybody's got any objections to the recommendations, which is the original one listed in the papers and the 3 additional recommendations just as presented and tabled today, if anybody's got any objections to that, can they raise their hand now? Otherwise, I'll take it as unanimous. Okay, I can't see that. So thank you very much, members and officers. Thank you very much. Those recommendations are carried unanimously. Thank you. Okay, so we'll now move on to agenda item 7, which is the Service Director for Children's Safeguarding report. Lou, could you kindly introduce your report, please?
Yes, good afternoon again. This is one of the sort of standard performance reports, if you like, that I produce for this committee regularly around performance in children's services. Of course, we're continuing with COVID, so things continue to be affected by that. And at the time that this report was written, we were in the midst of lockdown 2, as it were. Obviously, as we're speaking to you today, we're coming to the very end of that. We took the decision as soon as lockdown 2 was announced that actually we would continue to see our children on a face-to-face basis, except obviously if they were displaying COVID symptoms. And so we have continued to do that. And actually, I think one of the things that's been quite clear is that decision that we made all the way back in March to make sure that vulnerable children will continue to be seen has contributed to us having less of an increase in demand, perhaps at the end of the kind of lockdown period and into the summer and into the autumn term than some other local authorities have. That said, we are seeing an increase in the number of young people who are accessing early help assessments. Now that might translate through into further demand as we move forward. We'll have to keep a close eye on that. In terms of the rest of the performance indicators, actually things are generally moving in the right direction and continuing to do so. So, and even those that might look like they're moving in the wrong direction are actually probably in the context moving in the right direction. So numbers of children on child protection plans, for example, have been stepping up slowly over the last few months. So that's at the bottom. So that's just above paragraph 2.17. But interestingly, and what you need to do when you look at indicators like that is to see them in the context of everything else that's happening. And what we're seeing is that we have fewer applications for court. We have, in terms of care orders, and that's the table just below 2.19. And we have more children in what's called pre-proceedings, or the public law outline, which is the state before proceedings, than we've had before. And if you have that, then you would expect, if you've got fewer children in proceedings, you'd expect to have more children subject to child protection plans and pre-proceedings. So actually that's a sign that things are at the moment working through as we'd want to see them work through. Children in care numbers are continuing their downward trajectory. We're now basically in line with the average of our statistical neighbours. That's the first time that that's been the case for a number of years actually, and certainly since I've been in charge of services. And it's a good thing. It's aligned with the implementation of family safeguarding, and that rollout is continuing to do well. We're continuing to recruit staff and implement that performance. So I won't go through in massive detail, save because I'm sure members will have questions, but I did want to just sort of finish on a positive, which is that, you know, we are also seeing a much reduced turnover for qualified social workers. So back in 1920, it was 12.4% turnover, which is really good, and it's better than national average and regional averages. It's also much improved on where we have been in the past. And what I see that as being is, you know, affirmation, if you like, that caseloads are coming back under control, that workload is under control, and people are feeling, you know, broadly speaking, content and positive about working in Cambridgeshire, which is a good thing, because the service itself is becoming much more stable, I think, as time progresses. But I'll stop there and take some questions.
Thank you very much, Lou. Members, anybody want to raise any questions in relation to Lou's report? I can't see any hands. Lucy.
Again, it's not really a question, it's a thank you to Lou for his report, and a kind of broad agreement that it looks as if things are not doing anything extreme, which actually is pretty much what we're hoping at the moment. That any direction that's gentle is probably okay, and that's actually quite reassuring. So thank you for the report. It's a good report, and fingers crossed things are going in a reasonable direction. So that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. Okay, so given we've not got anybody else on speak, I just want to say personally, Lou, I know you've been briefing me constantly about this over the last sort of 9 months now since COVID. I personally just want to say thank you to you, and particularly the team, the social workers on the front line, you know, the ones who are doing the work. I think it's important that we recognise that, because it's been hugely challenging for people, as we all know, and especially when you're on the front line, so to speak. So I'm sure you can cascade our thanks down as a committee to everybody in the organisation. So members, we've been asked to note the performance. I see everybody shaking their heads and no hands raised. So we've noted the report, Lou, so thank you very much. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is a finance monitoring report. Martin Wade, the strategic finance business partner, would you introduce the report? Is he waiting to come in?
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, Martin. We've just welcomed you to the committee meeting. If you'd like to present your report, please.
I will indeed. Thank you. So yes, so you've seen the financial monitoring report to the end of October, and as you can see, the overall position in year has improved from a previous overspend of 1.9 million down to an overspend of £450,000, which is obviously a positive movement. Within that, and it kind of linked to what Lou was saying, although the numbers in children in care continue to reduce, we have seen a slight increase in the overspend on children in care due to an increase of one particular high cost placement that has gone in. And as we said at the previous meeting, that's one of the potential risks as the kind of the lag of the impact of COVID starts to come through. Elsewhere, we've seen some reductions in costs on unaccompanied asylum seekers. I think, as we highlighted again at the previous meeting, we're now starting to see the kind of appropriate level of funding coming in from the Home Office, which is obviously kind of freeing up kind of core budget elsewhere within that particular area, which is obviously a positive. Equally, there's been some reviews around adoption allowances, which has resulted in a further underspending year. And again, both of those, as we come on to the next paper around future savings proposals, both of those kind of translate into full year savings going forward. Likewise, again, linked to the continued reduction in children in care, that's obviously also had a positive impact in terms of the transport of those young people, and we've seen a continued reduction in terms of the costs associated to that, both in respect of the actual numbers, but equally in terms of some reviews of some of the routes and contract prices for some of that transport as well. For that as well. I think one other positive to build on in terms of is a reduction in the forecast around the high needs block. So obviously at the start of the year we were forecasting a in-year overspend of around 12.7 million. That's actually come down this month by about 1.2 million. So again, obviously in the context of the overall cumulative deficit on the high needs block, it is still a significant amount, but obviously that is a move in the right direction. Again, with that, and that's probably alongside children in care, it's just that caveat again about the unknown impact of COVID, which is still likely to come through in the latter part of the year. I think they're the kind of main things I wanted to highlight, Chair, so if there's any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got Councillor Whitehead, please. Oh, you're on mute, Joan.
Sorry, I'm on page 45 of our papers, and it concerns the paragraph about not having to pay children who've left care at 18, therefore we don't have to pay a carer's allowance anymore. I mean, obviously those children continue to be financially supported. I think this appears both here and in the budget paper. So where is the budget for, or where does the money come from to continue to support those children when we're no longer paying their carers? They've moved out of the care system, but they do continue to get financial support. Is that from a totally different pot of money in somebody else's budget, so we don't have to worry about it, or does it appear somewhere else in our budget?
And is that, it's Lou, is that relating to unaccompanied asylum seeking young people?
No. On page 45, it's the point that Martin made about, because the number of children have now left care, yes, at 18, we're not having to pay carers, so we've made a saving there. And I was just wondering, therefore, where is the budget for continuing to pay for those individuals once they've left carers? I mean, they do continue to get financial support. Is it a different budget? Does it go to adults and we don't have to care about it?
Of course not. No, of course we continue to care for them. But legal order allowances end at the age of 18. So where you've had a larger group or a larger population of young people leaving care, as we have had actually, then that's been one of the benefits of that. And because we're seeing fewer coming into the system now, we're able to profile it slightly differently. So that's very much around legal orders. So that's special guardianship order, adoption allowances and all the rest of it. If people are entitled to leaving care support, then that comes from a different budget and that's accounted for separately. And, you know, so I think that's where that is.
Oh, right. So in fact, I mean, it's a sort of accounting process, isn't it? Because they are going to continue to be something that we've got to support. It's just that they're not going to be supported quite there. Is that right?
Well, except that the allowances that are paid for special guardianship order carers, for example, up to the age of 18, if they're eligible for that, are quite high. So it is, you know, you don't continue to provide that level of support to a young person because they are then legally an adult, and the adoption order allowances and special guardianship order allowances do finish at that point.
So do they get funding from, do they get help from the government? Are they eligible to do things like, you know, universal credit or unemployment benefit? Or
Absolutely. If they're, yes, I mean, they become, you know, that. So these are children who are not predominantly not in our care. They are, right. You know, children who have been placed permanently either with adopters, and to be honest, with adopters, the type of adopters, or the, you know, adoption allowances are generally paid up to 18 only where children and young people have got particular additional needs, and right. You know, and they may be eligible for support from in their own right as disabled young people if they meet those criteria. But absolutely, in terms of special guardianship carers, then once you become an adult, you're entitled to benefits of your own, or of course to be working and all the rest of it, and hopefully doing that.
Thank you very much. Yes, I seem to remember Wendy talking about that at some stage, but I just thought a bit of clarification would be useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. Councillor Downs, please.
Yes, thank you, Martin. First of all, a very practical point. I wonder whether you could, in future, number your paragraphs more clearly, so that when we have questions, we can refer to them more easily. Your report has got paragraph 2.1, which goes on for 3 pages, and it would be much easier if we could actually, you know, we can break it down a little bit. That's a practical thing. But I have actually got a question. Now I'll try to find the reference. It's page 43, and it's a 1, 2, 3, about the 5th paragraph down on page 43. It's headed education. Can you see it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. A number of services are forecasting overspends due to well, never mind about that for a moment, due to loss of income as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Where have we lost income because of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think John put this up.
Shall I come in, Peter? So a lot of our services are underpinned by training we offer, consultancy, support into you know, particular schools at particular times. Because we haven't been able to offer the full programme and deliver a lot of the in-school support, particularly around or in early year settings, for instance, where we're doing consultancy, we're doing observations. We haven't been able to do that, so we've had to forsake the income as a result of that. You know, the outdoor centres, simply because we're not allowed to hold residential trips at the moment, it's against the DfE regulations at the current time, have meant we've been short there as well. So it's all to do with what we would normally do in school that we've been unable to do as a result of COVID. Right,
thank you. My second question was about the same page, but I think the bottom paragraph, that home to school transport. How's that been working? I mean, I see buses going past practically empty, and for obvious reasons, and notice a massive increase in children cycling to school, and of course parents taking them in. How's our school transport worked out financially?
Well, as the report covers, you know, we have seen increases in cost. Obviously, we received a grant from government that went into the combined authority. So there was, I think, 600,000, 700,000 pounds that have netted off some of those costs. We've had to adjust some routes. We've had to provide additional buses. We've had to take additional measures in terms of cleaning and risk assessments that happen in those fleets. So I think this year's a bit misleading. You know, it will settle. We know parents aren't using necessarily the transport they have previously. So we are monitoring the current position in terms of take up. And obviously part of our plans is how we, you know, you've heard earlier about how we procure it. We also need to think carefully about how we may rerun routes and things like that. So I think it's a very odd year this year. I think to put your finger on exactly what's driving it is virtually impossible. What I can say is that we've had relatively few complaints about transport. We've been able to meet demand despite the fact there isn't an infinite amount of buses we can draw on. And you know, our attendance in Cambridgeshire was the 3rd highest in the country last week. So we're obviously managing to get children in despite these challenges. So I'm really positive about the hard work our transport team have done, albeit there is some additional cost.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. I've got no other members who want to speak or have indicated to speak. So The recommendation is we've been asked to review and comment on the report, which is what we've done. So unless I see any hands objecting to anything, we'll take that as noted and move on. Okay, Martin, thank you very much for coming today and presenting. Okay, so we will now consider item 9, the Children and Young People's Committee review of the draft revenue and capital business planning proposals of 2021 to 22 to 25 to 26. This report was published on the 26th of November and circulated electronically to members of the committee. I accepted this as a late report for consideration at today's meeting on the following grounds. Reason for lateness: the delay has a result of needing to collate an analysis and analyse the most up-to-date financial, local and national data sets in order to enable the committee to have the best possible discussion on the current position and future opportunities. And the reason for urgency was to enable the committee's views to be available to the General Purpose Committee when it reviews the budget proposals on the 22nd of December this year. This report contains an Appendix 1, which is exempt from the publication under paragraph 3 of Part 1 of the Schedule the 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended, in that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. Information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. If any member of the committee wishes to discuss the item or information contained within the appendix, we will need to consider whether we go into private session. So my question as normal is does anybody want to go into discuss the confidential appendix? So Simon Taylor, please.
Yeah, I've run 3 questions past through Rashenda and yourself and John on the exempt form, and what I'm going to ask, it has been noted that it's I'm okay to ask it. Yeah. Is that okay, Simon?
Yes, that's fine. Jonathan's been consulted and we've agreed that you can ask those because it's not going to disclose any confidential information. So does anybody else want to raise an issue within that we need to go into private setting for? No, thank you. Okay, so the Service Director for Education and Children's Safeguarding and the Strategic Finance Business Partner will introduce the report. So over to you, please.
Right, hello. So sorry, I was just struggling to bring myself off mute. So there are some savings built in terms of children and safeguarding, partly built on the discussion that we've just been having, actually. So in relation to unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, it's very welcome that government has decided to fund the true cost of looking after unaccompanied asylum-seeking young people, and critically to supporting young accompanied asylum-seeking adults who've yet to have their status determined, because that was actually the area where funding was very low for local authorities. So care leavers are now funded absolutely appropriately. And that enables us to reduce some of the core cost contribution that was being made in relation to those budgets. Similarly, in relation to special guardianship and adoption order allowances, projecting forward, we can see that we have headroom in the budget that we can make savings there, and that's about numbers declining, which is in line with fewer children coming into the care system. In respect of, lost my place, I do apologise. So in respect of the clinical service, what this is based on is we are looking at developing a focused clinical service for children and young people in care. And again, under the previous structure within children's services, we had the unit model, of course, which had 32 small units, social work units, each of which had a clinician attached to them. We've moved away from that model. We have the family safeguarding model now, which is less resource intensive in terms of that need, which means that actually we can increase the offer to children and young people in care for clinical services, but also deliver a small saving. And I think it's already been said in terms of home to school, not home to school, but children in care transport has reduced as well because the numbers have come down. So that's where we're at with those.
Thank you, Lou. John, did you want to come in, or Martin?
No, I was just going to reinforce the point Lou made at the very end there, the final business case around the children in care transport. Obviously, you've heard a lot about transport today, so happy to take any questions on that proposal, but that money has already been saved, so it's an easy, straightforward one to bring to the committee.
Okay, members got any questions in relation to this particular paper? If you want to raise your hand. Can't see anybody. Simon, did you want to ask a question? Simon, over to you. You're on mute.
Thanks. Sorry, I wasn't quite sure where we were, whether we were on that bit yet. Okay. So it's just to obviously do with schools. Sydney at secondary, it's saying that yes, it needs additional capacity. What it doesn't actually say what the basic need requirements are. So I would actually like to know that, because on that report, if you look at it, it tells you what the basic needs are on every other school, but I just don't know what Sydney secondary, what the additional capacity, what is it? So that would be good to know. Also, Loves Farm Primary, the scheme start on that is 2021 to 22. The building hasn't even started yet. Do we need to look at the sort of revision of those dates? And does anyone know when the housing development is actually going to start on that site? And then the third question is Samuel Pepys, and I know John has said that he may not be able to say too much about this in public session, but for Samuel Pepys to expand, we're looking at site. We're looking at site, to get some more land. But yeah, do we know more about this land, whether or not we've acquired it?
Okay, should I come back on those in order? So in terms of the secondary provision in St Neots, we are still looking eventually at going to 22 form entry across the town. That's up from current 17 form entry that is there. Current estimates, and obviously ties into the next conversation about house building, show that things have slowed down. We're unexpecting to see any increase in capacity needed until 2025. So we will rework the wording that's going into that paper to make it really clear on the future prospects. And I think, given Councillor Taylor, you've asked quite a lot of detail, we'll bring a paper on the St Neots school place planning issues and give it you as a note to this committee, just so you can see our thinking. In terms of Loves Farm, obviously COVID has hugely impacted upon house building, has slowed things down. The market has not risen quite as quickly as we expected. Obviously, we bought Wintringham Park online now. That school is now ready to go and opening. It was always the intention that Loves Farm would not be released until the need was there, and we'd satisfied the demand that was coming from the Wintringham Park area. So again, that will be shifting back, but obviously will be developed, and it's, this is part of the dark art of school place planning, in line with the need for local places for local children. So it's a delicate balance, but we'll work on that and we'll come back. We haven't got a firm date yet because we're waiting for revised housing estimates. And quite rightly, you've said there's no development on that site yet, and we need to think about how that moves forward. In terms of Samuel Pepys, all I can say is there is active conversations going on about the provision. It's one of our outstanding special schools. It does a fantastic job for its community, good outcomes. It needs more space. We have got some options, but there are active conversations continuing. I'll be in contact when we can move that forward and let you know what the next stages of that will be. Hopefully that's answered everything for St Neots.
Thank you.
Thanks, John, and thank you, Simon. Members, has anybody else got any questions they want to pick up in relation to this report? Anybody want to discuss anything? No? Okay, this, ultimately this is recommendation for going to GPC on the 20th. I guess for me, it's still understanding the impact of COVID really in this report. That's where we are at the moment. Is, you know, there's still a lot of unknowns really, so which is borne out by the figures in the report. Members, so it's hard for me to gauge, bearing in mind only one person's asked a question, what the feeling of the committee is in relation to this. So I'm going to take it that we're going to note the recommendations on block as per the report. So is everybody content that we take them on block?
Can I just say, Simon, we're noting them, so so that's all.
Well, I think you'll find that it's endorsing the budget savings proposals, item C, endorsing the changes of the capital programme, item D, and noting the update. So you're quite right. There's three noting and there's 2 endorsing. So
in that case, I think we need to not. I would not be willing to endorse them. So thank you for drawing that to our attention.
Okay, so I'll take a vote then. Okay, because I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that, what they're voting for and what's happening. So. So if you're in favour of A to E on the recommendations, you either say for, against, or abstain. Okay. So Councillor Ambrose Smith. For. Councillor Downs.
Abstain.
Councillor Every.
For.
Councillor Hay.
For.
Councillor Hoy.
For.
Councillor Netzinger.
Abstain.
Councillor Simon Taylor.
Abstain.
Councillor Whitehead.
I apologise, due to being in hospital, I'm afraid I haven't read this paper, so I will have to abstain, I'm afraid.
Councillor Wisson.
For.
And Councillor Bywater, myself, is in favour. Andrew, you don't get to vote on this, I don't think. No, sorry about that. Okay, so that's, my reckoning, a majority have carried then. Okay, so thank you very much, members. We'll now move on. We'll now move on to item number 10, which is an update on housing related support strategy. Lisa Sparks, the Commissioner for Housing Related Support, would you introduce the report? Is she being held again? Is she being waiting to let in?
Monica, can you bring Lisa into the meeting, please?
I'm sorry, Chair, I'm having technical problems here.
Okay, well, I can see Lisa's appeared. We'll just give it a second. Lisa, if you can hear me, if you could reply, please.
Yeah, I can hear you, Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. Lisa, we've formally introduced the paper, so if you could come in, please, and present your paper.
Of course. So this is just an update paper to let you know where we are with the housing related support work that's been going on. So some people will be aware that we've obviously been out to consultation on the strategy that was developed, which was one of the recommendations from the 2018 review that we undertook. We had a good response to the strategy consultation. The responses have all been looked at and a revised version has been produced following that. That is going to Adults Committee for approval next week, but a copy of that's also been included with the papers for information for yourselves as well. Essentially, the focus of the strategy is setting out our priorities for the next 2 years, which are focused on ensuring services commissioned to support homeless adults, rough sleepers, offenders and young people at risk of homelessness are looked at, and we're looking at doing some redesign work to ensure that they're able to continue to effectively meet the needs of current and future customers. So that's the housing related support strategy. In terms of the savings, members will be aware that there was quite a significant saving attached to this work. We have achieved 456,000 of savings through the work to date. We still have some funding excuse me, to save against the target. However, since the decision around savings was made, there's obviously been quite a large scale change in terms of social, political and financial climate. So at the moment there have been discussions looking at whether or not we need to revisit that, and again that is a decision that, or something that will be endorsed by Adults Committee next week. But generally we are looking at the potential for removing the remaining saving if that is possible. In terms of the other element, the housing related support redesign, and again some people will have been involved in this through the member reference group, which has been incredibly helpful. We are still working up the various models. We are still working towards changing the services that we're currently commissioning. So we're looking at future-proofing them, moving away from just reliance on a hostel model of accommodation and looking at how we can introduce other elements such as the step-down accommodation, but also make sure that the models that we commission are able to support those with more complex needs, which is one of the gaps that we have at the moment within services. So far, we've undertaken some soft market testing and we got good response to the soft market testing for the young people services. We've used that feedback to start looking at models across the county. We've shared those with the members reference group so far. And we now need to start looking at sharing those models more widely so that we can get the views of other partners, of district housing partners and also providers, so we can start to redesign and develop those models further. In terms of next steps, apart from working up the more detailed models for each area, we're also looking at how we can get client feedback on the models as well, which is slightly more challenging at the moment, but we're looking at ways we might be able to do that. There will also be market engagement events scheduled for it prior to going out to tender. The next steps will also be development of specifications, and then we'll be coming, it says here, we'll be coming back in January to set out the procurement approach, but I believe that's actually been moved back to March now. But obviously the full procurement approach will come back to this committee and to Adults Committee as well.
Okay.
Does anyone
Thank you,
have any questions?
Thanks, Lisa. Yes, Councillor Hay, please.
Hello, thank you, Lisa. My question revolves around, in the paperwork 1.3, it clearly says that the statutory duty for homelessness sits with the district councils.
Mm-hmm.
But then it goes on in 1.4 saying about redesigning current support services for homeless young people. Nowhere does it give us a clear idea of exactly what districts are responsible for and what county are responsible for within this paperwork. And I'm just very concerned that there could be an overlap and duplication of work here.
Okay, so the district councils have the statutory responsibility for homelessness in as much as if somebody is threatened with homelessness or if they are homeless, that is where they go to have a homelessness assessment. They will then decide under the homelessness legislation whether or not they have any duty to accommodate that person temporarily, but it will only be a duty around accommodation. They're not obliged to provide support, although some local authorities do ensure that within their temporary accommodation there is some low level of support available. The services that the county commissions are around providing housing related support, so actual support to help the people live in a more independent settings or situation and help them to develop those life skills to move on. The people that come into the housing related support services are not necessarily people that councils would have a statutory duty towards in terms of homelessness. And as I say, if they did have a full duty, it would be about accommodating people, not providing that support and that like the sort of life skills elements and other things that come with the staff visiting and the support planning and everything else around the young person.
But thank you, that does make it clearer.
Thanks. Wendy, I think you want to come in?
Yes, Councillor Hay, I just thought it might be worth saying that part of the reason the county do provide housing related support is if we didn't, for some of these more vulnerable groups that have got additional needs, their accommodation could break down and they could end up in some of our bed-based care, so our residential bed-based care or high-level supported living settings. So it is a preventative measure to stop that happening.
Thanks, Wendy. Members, any other questions for Lisa? I think for me, you know, because I've been party selling these discussions as we've gone forward, is that I think it's a sensible decision to just sort of put the brakes on this a little bit in relation to the saving targets, because, you know, COVID has been unprecedented, and, you know, if we'd have pushed ahead like a bulldozer, and it'd have ended up costing us more money from the potential savings that we had suggested. So I think it's a bit of smart thinking, really, and about just taking a little step back here and thinking about it more carefully. It is March, I believe, that it's going to come back to CYP, Wendy. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct, Simon.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Simone, do you want to come in?
Yeah, Sam, I was just going to actually echo what you've just said. I think it's a smart move just to put it on hold, the savings at the present time.
Thanks. Thank you. Members, we'll go to the recommendation. We've just been asked to note it and comment on the report, which we have done. So, Lisa, thank you very much for your time today. Members, we'll take that as noted. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Members, we'll now move on to the last items on the agenda this afternoon, item 11, which is our normal housekeeping, which is the committee agenda plan, training plan and appointments. So, Rashenda, would you take us through the published agenda, please, if there's any changes, please?
There's only 2 changes to note, Chair, which are those which have been raised during the meeting this afternoon. So that's an additional report that John Lewis mentioned in relation to Winter Fund that would be coming in either January or March, which will be confirmed with the committee, and the HRS paper moving from January to March.
Okay, thank you. And then, members, we've just been asked to note the training plan, which in current circumstances has been quite difficult, and appointments, we've been asked to note the committee appointments, which we have done. Okay, so that leads me to the conclusion of today's meeting. The next meeting will be on Tuesday, the 19th of January 2021. So, crikey, the year has gone very quickly. So may I take the opportunity, if I don't see you, to have a very nice Christmas. Wish you all a very happy Christmas, and to all our staff and our young people that we're responsible as corporate parents in the county. So have a safe Christmas, however that looks. Simone, did you want to just come in?
Sorry to interrupt. Can I just ask, Jonathan, you said about the paper for Sydney's secondary provision. When would that be? Because, sorry, we're aligning it with the sort of next agendas. When would that be?
So I wasn't suggesting bringing it to the committee. I would write you a briefing note that I'd share with the committee to get that around. So if I can get that to you in January at some point, that'd be great.
Would you include the other St Neots councillors?
Yeah, well, if I produce a report, I'm more than happy for you to share it with them as well. I'll share it with the group, because I think there is some quite significant school place planning issues, but I don't think it's necessary to have a conversation, because I don't think there's any decisions or view to be sought. So I'll just do a briefing note.
Thank you. Okay, so you cut me off in my prime there. So yeah, have a nice Christmas, and I'll see you in the new year, everybody. The meeting is now closed. So
happy Christmas.
Bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.